There was a time when the stars themselves seemed to sing the name of the Eldar. Across a million crystal spires and sunlit worlds, their civilization shimmered like a dream-given form, cities that floated upon the void, their surfaces gleaming with the light of captured suns. The air hummed with psychic resonance, the living energy of countless souls intertwined in perfect harmony. To walk upon an Eldar world was to witness the artistry of the cosmos itself, sculpted oceans, skyborne gardens, and the kind of serene perfection that lesser races would mistake for divinity. But for the Eldar, it was simply existence, effortless beauty, eternal grace. They had long surpassed the need for conquest or crude labor. Thought and will alone shaped their destiny. Where the Mechanicus relied upon the grinding gears of machines, the Eldar sculpted reality with the precision of gods. Whole continents could be reshaped in an instant, their desires made manifest through psychic craft and ancient technology whose sophistication has never been matched. It was said that no world was truly separate from another. Every mind was a note in the vast symphony of their collective being. They did not simply rule the galaxy, they were the galaxy's pulse. And yet, within that perfection, something hollow began to stir. Immortality, for all its splendor, breeds a quiet decay. When a people know no death, no need, no struggle, the spirit begins to hunger for meaning. The Eldar, in their boundless mastery, sought sensation not out of survival, but curiosity. 1,000 pleasures were explored, each more refined, more intoxicating than the last. Art, emotion, and ecstasy intertwined until they could no longer tell one from the other. The first temples of excess were not built in defiance of their gods, but in pursuit of deeper beauty, the search for experiences so vivid that they might pierce the veil between the material and the divine. At first, it was harmless, festivals beneath nebulae that glowed in impossible hues, symphonies that could make the heart tremble and the soul weep, lovers whose passions ignited worlds. But indulgence, once discovered, never sleeps. The Eldar began to crave more. What was once sublime became mundane, and what was once forbidden became merely another form of art. The greatest among them whispered that the path to true enlightenment lay not in restraint, but in surrender, to feel all things, pleasure, pain, despair, bliss, in their purest forms. It was a philosophy that spread quietly, irresistibly, like perfume on the wind. There were voices that warned of what was coming, seers and mystics who peered too long into the immaterium, spoke of shadows gathering in the warp, faint at first, then growing stronger, shaped by the psychic outpouring of their race's boundless emotion. These were not mere dreams, they said, but ripples of something being born, something vast, something hungry. But their warnings were drowned beneath the revelry. The Eldar had no reason to fear. They had conquered death itself. What could possibly threaten them now? Even the gods were silent. Kyla Mensha Kaine, the bloody-handed god of war, no longer walked among his children. Isha, the mother of life, whispered only through fading dreams. Only the laughing god remained, distant and cryptic, his laughter echoing faintly through the webway, as if mocking the fate they could not yet see. The others, the strong, the noble, the divine, had turned their gaze away. Whether out of sorrow or disdain, none can say. But the Eldar continued to celebrate beneath the quiet eyes of absent gods, and so their empire grew ever more decadent. Whole planets transformed into pleasure cults, their atmospheres thick with incense and song. Great cathedrals of sensation rose from the ground like living jewels, pulsing with psychic energy. Those who still clung to discipline, the ones who practiced restraint, who sought knowledge over indulgence, were dismissed as relics of a bygone age. The few who could not bear the noise and excess fled outward, building vast ships that would one day become the craft worlds. They saw what was coming, though even they could not name it. There are records, preserved within the infinity circuits, of the last quiet days before the fall, stories of stillness before the storm, when the skies over the Eldar core worlds began to shimmer unnaturally, when the dreams of their seers turned to screams and the psychic hum of their people became a discordant wail. But in those final nights, none could hear the warning clearly. They mistook the trembling of reality for ecstasy. They mistook the death of their souls for rapture, because when a god is born, it is never gentle. The first signs of the end came as whispers through the warp, faint distortions that twisted the dreams of the Eldar, seers who once gazed into the immaterium with clarity, began to glimpse shapes that defied understanding. Great coils of color and emotion flickered at the edge of perception, beauty and horror entwined. They saw faces forming in the void, made from the very essence of desire and despair. Yet even then, their warnings went unheard. Among the great noble houses and pleasure cults of the core worlds, prophecy was just another form of entertainment. The oracles were not silenced by persecution, but by laughter. Their fears were dismissed as artful melodrama, performances of doom to be enjoyed, not believed. The Eldar could not comprehend that their joy could birth horror. They had long believed that emotion was power, that the warp was theirs to shape, and for millennia that was true. The immaterium had answered their every whim, its tides bending beneath their psychic supremacy. But the warp is not a servant, it is a mirror, and as the Eldar's passions deepened into depravity, that mirror began to warp and crack. Their feasts of pleasure became rituals of excess. Their festivals of unity became orgies of psychic indulgence, where thousands joined their minds in shared delirium. Their souls sang, and the warp listened. On some worlds, the air itself began to shimmer with unnatural vitality. The walls of their crystal towers bled light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The veil between the material and the immaterial grew thin, and strange harmonics filled the skies, tones too low for the ear, but felt in the marrow of the soul. Those sensitive to the warp trembled beneath that resonance, describing it as music that was both divine and wrong. They could feel something vast moving beneath the surface of reality, gathering weight, thought, and hunger. And then the dreams began. Across 1,000 worlds, the Eldar dreamed of a radiant presence, a being of unbearable beauty, whose touch promised ecstasy beyond comprehension. Some awoke weeping in joy, others screamed in terror. Artists painted visions they could not explain. Sculptors carved figures of impossible grace, unable to remember the faces they depicted. The warp's reflection had become a beacon, and it was watching them. Among the outcasts, those who had fled the core worlds before decadence reached its height, the signs were interpreted with growing dread. In the far reaches of the galaxy, aboard the nascent craft worlds, farseers gathered to read the psychic tides. They saw the storm swelling, the warp's surface boiling with malignant energy. They felt their kin's emotions feeding something that was no longer just an echo. It had taken shape, drawn from the collective soul of their people. They spoke of a shadow forming at the heart of creation, a nascent god forged not of stars, but of sin. But it was already too late. The momentum of their civilization was unstoppable. What began as indulgence had become religion. There were entire sects devoted to the worship of sensation itself, priests and priestesses who believed that through unrestrained experience they could pierce the final veil and commune directly with the divine. They spoke of a coming revelation, the birth of a new God who would lead them into an age of eternal pleasure. Their temples were filled with psychic fire, their worship blending thought and flesh into radiant blasphemy. And deep within the warp, their devotion stirred something awake. It began as a tremor, a subtle distortion that rippled across the immaterium, unnoticed by all but the most gifted psychers. Then came the silence, the sudden, suffocating stillness that fell upon the psychic senses of an entire species. The hum of their collective mind, once harmonious, began to fracture. A chill passed through the hearts of the Eldar, who still dared to listen. For the first time in millions of years, the warp did not answer their call. It watched, it listened, it waited. There are fragments of records recovered from the ruins of those lost worlds, vox echoes and shattered data crystals that captured only fleeting impressions. They speak of nights when the skies turned crimson, when stars pulsed in sync with a heartbeat that was not their own. The air grew heavy with unseen pressure, and every living being felt their thoughts dragged toward an unseen center. Some claimed they could hear whispers behind their eyes, voices soft and alluring, promising release. Others tore at their flesh to silence them. The Eldar did not yet know it, but they stood on the edge of their extinction, and at the threshold of their god's awakening. The birth of horror is always mistaken for the arrival of light. It happened without warning, though the omens had been endless. The psychic tide that had for so long fed the Eldar's pleasures surged to its peak and snapped. In an instant that stretched across eternity, every world at the core of their empire was consumed. It was not an explosion of fire or matter, but of thought, of soul, of pure emotion torn free from flesh. Reality folded inward, light imploded, and a scream unlike any other ripped through the warp. It was the sound of birth, the birth of a god. From that rapture came annihilation. Stars dimmed as the psychic shockwave tore through space, burning out minds across the webway, the craft worlds, even the distant colonies. The warp bloomed like a wound, vast, impossible, alive. Where once the proud heart of Eldar civilization had pulsed, there now stretched a chasm of roiling madness, the eye of terror. Its edges glimmered with impossible colors, its depths whispered with every sin ever dreamed. It was not merely a place, it was a scar across existence, the shadow of their desire made manifest. For the Eldar, who perished within, death was not release. Their souls were devoured, drawn screaming into the newborn consciousness of she who thirsts. For the first time since the dawn of the galaxy, a new god had been born in the warp, a god not of creation nor destruction, but of consumption. Her birth cry echoed across time, and in that sound lay the death of an empire. Those who survived did not survive unchanged. Across the craft worlds, psychers fell to their knees as waves of psychic agony tore through them. Many died instantly, their minds shredded by the force of the awakening. Others lingered, hollow-eyed and broken, their souls scarred by the taste of what had come into being. They spoke of a presence that had touched every living Eldar, an unending hunger that now waited just beyond the veil of perception. Wherever they turned their thoughts, they could feel her, waiting, watching, wanting. In the aftermath, silence fell across the stars. The once glorious worlds of the Eldar were gone, swallowed by the eye. What few remained intact drifted through the void, empty husks haunted by the echoes of laughter and song. The psychic harmony that had united their people was gone, replaced by the constant whisper of terror within. The Eldar had become prey to their own creation, for Slanesh was not content with their dead. She craved their living, their every thought, every heartbeat, every moment of despair. And so, from that day forth, every Eldar soul became a candle burning before an endless storm, always on the verge of being snuffed out and consumed in the ruins of their once holy cities. Among shattered temples and frozen laughter, the survivors found only one truth. Their gods had failed them. Cain had been torn asunder, his essence scattered into shards that burned within the hearts of the exarchs. Isha's cries for her children went unanswered, her pleas echoing endlessly within the immaterium. The laughing god alone had escaped, hiding within the labyrinthine depths of the webway, mocking the doom of his kin with a grin that even sorrow could not erase. It is said that some among the survivors went mad upon realizing the scale of what they had wrought. Others fell to their knees in repentance, carving runes of guilt and shame into their skin, swearing oaths to never again let desire rule them. The first spirit stones were crafted in those desperate days, forged from crystallized fragments of psychic energy to shield their souls from her hunger. To die without one was to be devoured. To live without one was to invite despair. Thus began the age of the soul's imprisonment, a life prolonged not for joy, but for fear. The craft worlds, once symbols of exploration and freedom, became arcs of mourning. Their halls echoed not with song, but with silence, a silence broken only by the soft hum of the infinity circuit, where the spirits of the dead whispered to the living. The Eldar had escaped extinction, but not damnation. Their survival was a sentence. Yet even then, within that void of despair, there flickered something faint, the ember of memory. They remembered what they had been, what they had lost, and what they could never again become. And though grief threatened to crush them, they endured, because to surrender would mean feeding her again. To feel too much, to hope too deeply, was to risk awakening her hunger anew. So they learned to walk the knife's edge, between apathy and agony, mastering the art of restraint. And in that discipline, something hard and new was born within them, a quiet strength forged from sorrow. The Eldar could no longer claim to rule the stars, but they could still remember them. In the wake of the cataclysm, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The light that once flowed from the Eldar homeworlds had vanished, leaving behind a wound in the firmament, the eye of terror, pulsing like an open scar. Even the stars nearest to it flickered uneasily, their brilliance dimmed by the raw presence of the newborn god. For the survivors, Scattered across the void in their craft worlds, there was no dawn, only the long echo of ruin. They drifted through silence, surrounded by the ghosts of a million unspoken laments. The psychic harmony that once bound them, the collective pulse of a species in perfect symphony, had become a curse. Every Eldar could feel the absence, a void in the soul where once there had been music. To open oneself to the warp, even slightly, was to feel the pull of her presence, the whisper of she who thirsts, pressing softly against the edges of thought. Some tried to block it out with discipline and meditation. Others succumbed, their spirits slipping away in the quiet of sleep, drawn into that endless hunger. It was said that you could tell when it happened by the sound, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh, as though the universe itself were taking another soul. On the craft worlds, the survivors struggled to rebuild meaning from the ashes of their perfection. Their civilization had not merely fallen, it had inverted. The values that once defined them, beauty, passion, expression, were now chains they dared not touch. Entire schools of philosophy were abandoned overnight. Art became restrained, ritualized. Emotion was measured, monitored, mastered. To feel was to risk death, for unchecked feeling fed her. The Eldar began to live as the shadows of what they once were, guarding every thought as though the warp itself were eavesdropping. Those who still dreamed of their gods did so in fear. The old pantheon was shattered, not destroyed, but fragmented. The Eldar no longer prayed for blessing, but for distance. They spoke the names of Kane and Aisha in hushed tones, as though invoking them might draw Slanesh's gaze. And yet, despite all, some refused to accept despair. Among the Farseers and Spirit Seers, there were whispers that not all had been lost. The laughing god still lingered, flitting through the webway, mocking both the mortal and divine for their folly. He had survived the birth of She Who Thirsts, not through strength, but through cunning. His laughter could sometimes be heard in moments of deepest sorrow, a cruel reminder that even tragedy could not silence wit. In time, the craft worlds learned to drift farther from the eye. Their seers guided them through the hidden currents of the galaxy, evading the storms that still boiled near that eternal wound. They watched as the galaxy darkened, as the Imperium of Man rose from ignorance, as orcs and necrons waged their endless wars, as chaos seeped through reality like ink in water. And they wondered if this was their punishment, to live long enough to see others repeat their mistakes. The irony was not lost on them. The proud race that had once toyed with divinity now hid among the stars, afraid even of its own reflection. But survival has its own kind of sanctity. Among the infinite halls of Wraithbone, a new rhythm emerged, quiet, deliberate, mournful. The Eldar became artisans of restraint, crafting not for glory, but remembrance. Their ships were cathedrals of silence. Their songs turned to chants of mourning. Within each infinity circuit, the souls of the dead whispered guidance to the living, their voices a constant reminder of what happens when passion consumes reason. Some among them believed that, in time, they might atone, that discipline could temper the madness that birthed their doom. Others whispered that nothing could cleanse what they had unleashed, that Slanesh would never tire, never sleep, and that every Eldar heartbeat was another drop of nectar for her thirst. And yet, even within that despair, there burned a spark, not of pride, but of defiance. The survivors began to weave prophecy again, though this time it was no longer blind. They spoke of paths, Asuryani, that each soul must walk carefully, balanced between sensation and oblivion. To follow the path was to survive. To stray from it was to be lost. The rigid disciplines of the path became the spine of their new existence. Art contained, war controlled, emotion disciplined. It was a fragile salvation, but a salvation nonetheless. In the void beyond their shattered empire, the Eldar turned their gaze back toward the eye, watching as it pulsed faintly across the stars, the heartbeat of their failure, the cradle of their greatest sin. And though none dared to speak it aloud, every soul among them knew the same truth. The gods they once adored had not abandoned them. They had simply changed their faces